So welcome everyone to my first health and wellness workshop. For those of you that know me, I have done several of these workshops for an organization that I'm a member of, Girl Trek, but this is my first one up under my brand, Redesign, Build, and Live. So as you all know, the name of this workshop is 7 Keys for Mental Wellness for Fall 2020. And the name of my company is Redesign, Build, and Live. So that is it with my presentation. So we are about to get started. And again, if you guys could just put yourselves on mute if you're not already, and we will start.
All right.
Okay, Cindy.
I'm so glad to see everybody here today. My name is Cindy Adeniyi. Adeniyi. It's taken me about 14 years to learn how to say that well, and Cindy is just fine. I love what I do. I love working with people to help their lives be better. Life is tough, things are hard, and if we can work together to make life a little bit easier, simpler for folks, I'm all about that. If you have questions as we go along, like Allison was saying, please put them in the chat. If you put a Q in front of it, that will help me to pick out the actual questions. And if it is something that I was planning to address as we were going along, I'll try to make sure that I address it. And then if not, we can address it at the end. And I'm just so grateful that you've taken this time out to spend with us. I would encourage you to have a pad and paper and plan as we're going along to get 5 ideas. Have that as your goal, to get at least 5 ideas while you're here, because 1 or 2 of them aren't going to work out anyway. But we want to make sure that you leave with something that can happen, preferably within the next 48 hours. So we know that when folks go to workshops and trainings and classes and CEUs and things like that, the tendency is to, while we're in that workshop, really have some great ideas about what we're going to do, and then we never do them. It never happens. And so part of our ability to kind of follow through lies in getting something done relatively quickly. So within the next 24 to 48 hours, what is something that you can do as a result of having been here? And I would encourage you to use the chat as we are going along, so that we can make this as interactive as possible. So we're going to start right off with that first one, creating goals that are focused on today's reality. One of our tendencies, not just with this whole COVID thing that's going on, but one of our tendencies is to have a real focus on the things that we cannot do, what can't happen. And we tend to live healthier lives if we are really focused on what can happen given what we have today. So I'm going to give an example of how this happens with traditions. We all have our family traditions, things that we normally do during the fall and into the holiday season. One of the traditions in my family, my grandmother started this. She started this tradition of making everybody a fruitcake. And, you know, a month before Christmas, she would start with baking these fruit cakes and pouring the wine over them every week to make sure that they were nice and moist. And then she got Alzheimer's. She couldn't do it anymore. And my mother decided to take on the tradition, right? Keep it going. And she did it for a while and realized that fruitcake fruit is expensive. And she couldn't afford to make everybody fruitcake. So she adjusted, she cut it down. The list of people who got fruitcakes kind of dwindled. And then she realized that, whoa, everybody in this family got diabetes. We don't need to be eating fruitcake. And so she cut it from a full fruitcake to a half a fruitcake. And then she went back through a couple years later and cut the sugar from regular sugar to some artificial sugar. She cut it down. And then a few years later, she cut it from everybody got a half a fruitcake to she made one fruitcake and everybody got a slice, maybe two. And what you saw there was the continuation of a tradition that had made folks very happy, but that had adjusted for the reality of what we have currently. And so the goal here is to make adjustments for what it is that we have now. So maybe, the family tradition in the fall is to go trick-or-treating. And now because of COVID, folks don't feel comfortable doing that. Or one of the things that's happening in my neighborhood is not a lot of people are going to do it. It just probably would not be worth it to families to try to do it. Coming up with something different instead that is still fun, that is still exciting for the kids, that still gets the job done, but that recognizes at the same time, this is my reality for this year. Now, that can be an even bigger issue when it comes to things like traveling. With the holidays coming up, maybe you're used to traveling halfway across the country. You may or may not feel comfortable with it. When working with some families that are dealing with financial realities, that they're used to having a big Christmas with spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars on children, and they're not going to be able to do that this year. And it's easy to kind of get caught up in what I can't do. And the challenge is instead to look at what it is that I can do, given economic reality, given COVID, given even the weather. Sometimes we get caught up. We want to do some wonderful things, but we don't do them because of the weather. How can I still engage? How can I still get out there? How can I still experience a full life, even when the weather is causing a lot of struggle? And so that's our first thing to do, is to focus on today's realities. Let's move ahead to the second one, acknowledging the collective struggles. This is a very, very unique time in our culture because we have a common struggle. And when we normally have these large events, it normally impacts a certain segment of the community as opposed to impacting absolutely everybody. So for example, when Katrina hit, there were folks whose lives were just torn apart in the south of our country. There were other folks that largely were not impacted or were minimally impacted. I saw gas prices go up. That was about all that I really experienced from that. And when a community, when a portion of the community is experiencing a difficulty, very often they can lean on another portion of the community. Well, now everybody's been affected. And that means that I'm trying to lean on you and you're trying to lean on me. And we're all kind of struggling. And so one of the things that I'm seeing in my practice is folks are saying things like, that best friend that I used to be able to talk to about everything, I can't do it anymore. She's got too much on her plate. That family member that I was always able to turn to if I was financially struggling, I can't do that anymore because they're financially struggling too. And so one of our realities that we have to acknowledge is that we are, as a community, struggling. And that means something different for our support networks. It may mean that whereas I used to go to that best friend for absolutely everything, maybe I just go to her for half of the stuff, and I got to come to my cousin over here for another half of stuff. I literally said, we may have to adjust how we look at our support networks overall. We may have to get some support from some different places. You've seen on television, if you've been watching the news, the lines at the food banks, and the people who are there that said, you know what, I never thought that I would be in a line for a food bank, but here I am. Or I used to give to the food bank, now I am needing the food bank. That's a different sort of support than that person was receiving before. And so one of the things we may need to be open to is getting some different types of support from different types of places than we did before. And for some folks, that does mean something along the lines of counseling or coaching or discipleship or mentorship. That might mean reaching out to a stranger in order to get support in ways that maybe weren't really necessary before. Maybe the support network was really good before. The other thing that we want to kind of recognize when it comes to our collective struggle is this idea of crisis fatigue. This is the phenomenon that happens approximately 6 months after there is a crisis, when folks no longer are banded together and strongly fighting the crisis. So if you remember what 9/11 was like, and after 9/11, you wanted to go buy a flag, you couldn't, because they were all purchased. We went to the fabric store to try to get red, white, and blue fabric. You couldn't get it because everybody was patriotic, and they were all gung-ho about the United States, and we're in this together, we're fighting terrorism. And 6 months later, you can get flags. They were all over the place. By the 4th of July of 2002, there was plenty of it. We had kind of faded in our resolve. And that's part of where we are now. It's been 6, 7 months since folks locked down, and we're tired of it. I mean, we're tired, we're bored. Folks are tired of these Zoom meetings. That's one of the reasons I'm so glad that everyone is here today. And folks are looking for something different. And so collectively, we've kind of gone into this bit of a slump. I just heard last night that they think those states that are having these surges, that it's not so much that school started, but rather that people have started gathering, having small gatherings and not wearing masks and such because they know the people. That's a reflection of, I haven't seen my best friend in 6 months. I need to see them. I need to hug a neck. Like, this is nice. I get to see your face, hear your voice, but I don't get to feel your presence. And that is something that we are all going through, which kind of makes us all a little bit irritable. And you may have noticed, either as you're going out and about in the grocery store line or in the parking lot, on the highways, there's a little bit of edge there that may not have been there 6 months ago. That edge is likely COVID fatigue, this crisis fatigue we are going through. And so recognizing that helps me, so that when somebody cuts me off, I'm not so quick to get upset about that. Because I recognize, okay, you're going through just like I am. You're having a hard time just like I am. And therefore, I can do a better job of managing my own irritation. I had to do this with my kids not too long ago. When they started getting a little snappy, and it's like, you know what, this is not necessarily about them trying to be disrespectful. This is more about them being stuck in the house. Now, we still got to correct the disrespect. But at the same time, I can take it down a notch. I can calm myself a bit because I know that there are things going on in the community. Let me encourage you in the chat, if you're thinking of other things that you've noticed that are happening in the community that are different from how it was 6 months ago, go ahead and include that in the chat. And help us to have a conversation. Um, we we then we then also can have a lot more compassion and mercy for those around us when we recognize, okay, you're having a hard time. I don't know you, but I know that you're going through this. So I know that you're having a hard time. Let me give you a little bit more grace. Let me let you cut ahead of me. Go ahead, go on through, because I understand that it's a challenge. All right, number 3 on our list is creating a family care plan. And of all of these, this is probably the one that is the most critical and perhaps the most impactful. Just to give some history on this whole idea of self-care, you may recall back in the late 90s, early 2000s, there's a lot of talk about burnout. Y'all remember that? We're talking about burnout and how it affects our jobs and how it affects how we deal with family. And it just became a really big buzzword. And then into the 2000s, into the teens, the concept of compassion fatigue came out, where particularly people in the helping professions, our teachers, our medical professions, those who are in some type of service as opposed to some type of product, got tired of what it was that they were doing. The idea of helping people wasn't as thrilling as it used to be. And that was kind of a change up from that idea of burnout. But then we started talking about compassion fatigue and the necessity of taking care of yourself in that process. And then came the concept of self-care. This idea that in order to take care of others, I must first be able to take care of myself. And the illustration that is almost universally used is that of when you're on an airplane, if there's a loss in cabin pressure, they tell you, put the mask on yourself first and then help the child. Because if you're trying to put the mask on the child, you'll pass out first, and then you've helped no one. And that is the idea behind self-care. In the meantime, while that's going on, there's another field of research that's coming up that kind of relates to this, and that is one of trauma. And one of the things that we are learning about trauma is that trauma really does stay in our bodies. Our bodies remember traumatic experiences in ways that we didn't necessarily recognize before. And that when people hear about trauma, they can experience secondary trauma. So when I, as a counselor, am working with somebody who's been through something traumatic, child abuse, war, really bad accidents, things like that, not only is the person who went through that experiencing trauma, I'm experiencing trauma just by hearing about it. Well, if you've watched the news, chances are you've experienced some secondary trauma. There's been some traumatic things that have been happening in our country and have been visualized in the news. And so in addition to our look at self-care, we also have this reality of secondary trauma that fuels that need for self-care. So after self-care, after folks started looking inward and how do I take care of myself? How do I get proper rest? How do I get exercise? How do I eat right? Once we kind of established that we needed that, we had another kind of shift, and that's one of mom guilt. And it might be spouse guilt or employee guilt, depending on the situation, but most often we hear about mom guilt. I know that I need to take care of myself. I know I need to do these things, but at the same time, I'm responsible for these other folks. I'm responsible for my children. I'm responsible for my spouse. I'm responsible for the employees that I supervise. I'm responsible to my boss. I'm responsible for this project. And I can't do the self-care because I have to do these things for which I am responsible. And so the guilt comes up, and I see some heads nodding, that prevents the self-care. And I'm going to suggest that there are some ways to get around that, including having a family care plan. So the family care plan is not just looking at me and what I need in order to be well rested and to be healthy and emotionally clear-minded and all of that. The family care plan is looking at both the extended family and the folks in my household. And if you've got a best friend who's like a sister, that person too. The family plan is going to incorporate all of those things and say, how do we as a family take care of ourselves? So generally that would mean one plan for the extended family and then one plan for the household. So I'll give you an example of how a family plan looks for an extended household. I have cousins, we're spread out over several states, and we usually talk to each other about 3 times a year. I call you on your birthday, you call me on my birthday, and we see each other for Christmas. That's 3 times a year. One of the things that we recognize, not just because of COVID, but also because of changes that were happening in our family, is that we needed each other more. And so now we call each other every 2 to 3 weeks. That's part of our family plan, that we're going to support each other by checking in on a more regular basis than was usual. It doesn't take a lot of money. It really, for me, it doesn't take a lot of time because I usually do it when I'm in my car on my way somewhere else. So it's not taking up time that I don't have. And I actually put it in my calendar in order to make sure that it actually happens. I've got call Allison, my cousin Allison, on my calendar, just to remind me to follow through with the family plan. And that's one of our big things, is how do I follow through? The trickier thing might be within our own household. How do we follow a family plan in our own household? And this might be the place where we have more opportunity, but also where it might be more of a challenge. So I want to think about, what are the needs of those folks in my household? What is it that my spouse needs? What is it that my children need? My mother-in-law is in our household. I need to think about the things that she needs as well. And then we're looking for things that help us all get our needs met at the same time. So for example, my spouse and I might take our children out to the pond that's near our house, and the kids who have a need for recreation, socializing, and just fresh air, they take their scooters and they go around the pond over and over and over again. And my husband and I sit on a bench and pretty much have a date while the kids are going around. And so it's not just me and my self-care, because I love to go sit by the pond. I could do that. I could do that by myself, but I'll feel guilty because I'm not including my family. Um, we're getting two birds with one stone. They're getting what they need. We're getting what we need, and it's all good. And therein lies the challenge. There are lots of opportunities to kind of incorporate how can you and I get our needs met at the same time. If I'm cooking, which is meeting the needs of the family, and my kid needs to socialize, maybe the kid needs to come and cook with me. It teaches them how to cook. It gives them some socialization. It gives them an opportunity to experience the gift of being nurturing and giving. It's really good for them, and it is part of them caring for the family at large and themselves. They can eat it. And so now I'm not just doing what's good for me, getting something done that makes me feel good. Now I'm doing something that's good for me, and I'm helping someone else in my family get what they need. All right. Screenless activities, engaging in screenless activities. So the research is starting to come in. We are starting to hear more about what is happening as a result of us sitting here watching these screens. We are hearing about headaches, eye pain, back pain, and joint pain, and difficulty sleeping as a result of us sitting here watching screens so much. And that is part of what is going on after 6 months of us not interacting in our traditional ways. So we have good reason to start moving away from screenless activities. We're grateful for the technology. Is it helpful? Absolutely. However, we do need to start probably getting away from spending quite so much time in front of screens. And there are lots of things, and I'm going to encourage you in the chat, let's just brainstorm some of the things that you used to do that maybe you don't do anymore, that don't involve a screen. So we have things that are exercise related. I noticed there was a time in my life when exercise became screen related, because we're doing the Zumba classes on YouTube or through Zoom or something like that, and maybe not going out and doing the walking, or we're doing the exercise videos instead of going out and actually walking. I love Leslie Sanson's walking videos, but it does put me in front of a screen. And so getting actually out there to do exercise, crafts, actually doing things with our hands other than typing. So that would mean sewing. I thought it was wonderful back when we had this shortage of masks, that the fabric all disappeared from the stores. People were making masks, and then people were just generally sewing. Sewing is a lost art. And a lot of us have, we have a sewing machine at home. When was the last time pulled it out? My sewing machine is right there, and dusty. You can see the dust. Getting off the screen and actually using it. Crochet, knitting, needlepoint. These are all things that have kind of gone the way of the past as we have moved towards more entertainment that is screen-based. We've kind of given up these lost arts. It's not too late to garden. For those of us in Georgia, I've got some folks in other states, but in Georgia, we still got a couple months that you can, we probably got to start this weekend or next, but we've still got some time to be sewing in the garden. Um, Someone mentioned puzzles. Yes, and puzzles are wonderful because they hit on our intellectual needs, and we can talk a little bit about that later. Um, that we need to have our minds stimulated, and puzzles, whether that's jigsaw puzzles or it is like word finds, crossword puzzles, Sudoku, all of those types of puzzles, particularly if it's not, one that's on your phone. And I got a bunch of games on my phone, but you can print out for free those types of puzzles, or you can get the little books in the store. There are wonderful puzzles, even at the dollar store and Five Below, the jigsaw puzzles. They are wonderful for our minds. Years ago, I had somebody who was struggling with schizophrenia, one of the most difficult mental illnesses to deal with. And she was on the medication, she was doing what she was supposed to do. But one of the things that she noticed was that when she was doing a jigsaw puzzle, it was almost like her mind was getting sorted out. That the mind that was all a jumble was now getting sorted out, even like you were sorting out jigsaw puzzle pieces. It's also been mentioned to go indoors and walk on the track. That is a great thing too, because when you're going indoors to walk on the track, you don't get the sunshine benefit. You do get the exercise benefit. You do get the stress relief benefit, and it means that there's no excuse if there's bad weather. So it's going to get done. That's part of our going to get things done. One of the ways that we can kind of institute our screenless activities is to have a time that there are no screens. So that might mean no screens before 4 o'clock. Even better, no screens after 7, so that you are not interrupting the sleep cycle. But having a designated time in order to not have screens makes it much more likely that we're going to do it. We're actually going to say it. It's been mentioned on the chat, just having a day for self-care, and turning off social media during that time. We do kind of have to carve out time for this. And as we're looking at priorities and looking at what is it that I need to get done during the day, sometimes that self-care or family self-care really needs to get on the agenda. So yes, I have this, that, and the other to do for work. Yes, I have this errand to run. I have these bills to pay, and I have to play a board game with my kids. And I have to have some reading time, and a book, an actual book, not a screen, an actual book. They still make them, wonderful books. That if we don't, it's not likely to happen. It's not. The other thing, and I'm glad social media was mentioned, the other joy of having some screenless time is that it by definition limits social media. Social media, I would argue, is a neutral item. It is a tool, just like a chainsaw. A chainsaw can be a wonderful tool to cut down a tree. It can also kill you. Like it's neutral. The chainsaw is neutral. It's what's done with it in the hands of the user. And social media is the same. And too often, social media is done to cut down people as opposed to uplift folks. And so if that's what comes up on your social media, it may be necessary um, to have some designated no social media. That can be very helpful to me. Very often when I do marriage counseling, there is some element of why the folks came to counseling that is social media related. Now, and that's kind of scary to me, that somehow or another social media has become so important that marriage was not at some point. And so we do need to be careful along those lines. Let's see. The other ones I had, things like cooking, talking, just talking. Um, when this first started, my kids had, kind of played all the games and they had done all the things to do in the house. And I look over and my mother-in-law is telling stories to the kids about the country she's from. And I was like, yes, this is wonderful. These kids need to hear the stories. Sometimes we just need to talk, to communicate with each other, to share with each other, and to have an emotional connection, to learn and to grow and to be stronger and better. All right, moving on. Our next one is reflecting on lessons that have been learned. So as we're entering the fall, we want to look at, what did I learn this summer? What did I learn this spring and this summer that I want to carry on? And I'll tell you that I heard from quite a few clients about the middle of the summer that they were saying things like, I didn't realize how much my commute was irritating me. I really need to do something about my commute. Or they were saying things like, kind of like that my schedule isn't so busy. They're feeling kind of guilty that such a tragedy has caused them to wipe clean their schedule. But at the same time, they kind of liked having a little bit more freedom, not running around quite so much. And so those were some of the things that they had learned. I heard you in the chat include some of the things that you may have learned over the spring and summer of this year that you would like to take into the fall. Because one of the things that is happening, one of the things that we're seeing, is that as things kind of get back to normal, or we identify our new normal going into the fall, folks are kind of going back to those old habits. That we're returning to living life like we did in February of 2020. Busy, overworked, overwhelmed, just everything I learned this summer, out the window. We want to be really very careful about. We've learned some things that are helpful. Let's not go back to the old ways of doing things. We've learned how to cook, at least I have. Learned how to cook more of my meals as opposed to going to fast food or going out quite so much. And now it's kind of, okay, it's easy to go back there. It's easy to go back to eating out every day. And so what have we learned? And how can we keep that going as life returns to normal? So maybe that means I can't do 3 Bible studies a week. I didn't realize how many different Bible studies I had gotten myself involved in just because it just happened to fit my schedule. And I was doing all this reading, and it was taking away from family time. And maybe I don't need to be in Bible studies, good. I don't necessarily need to be in 3 in 1 week. That's not necessarily helpful. Folks that have kids in soccer and in other sports and music lessons, and those things take time. And so part of the question becomes, do I really need all of those things in my life? All right, moving on, decision making and social activities. Decision making and social activities. It has become a bit of a spotty question or a difficult question when folks have certain ideas about how to best stay safe, and other folks have different ideas about how to best stay safe. So we've got folks that are masking, we have folks that are not masking, we have folks that are maintaining about 6 feet of social distance, we have folks that are maintaining 2 feet. And I'm just thinking about something that happened at Walmart. Um, that we all kind of have a different idea in mind as to what I need to do to stay safe at this point. And so one of the things that we need to do as we're making decisions on how we're interacting is we need to find out, what's it going to be like? When I go out and I'm interacting with you, when we're going to this barbecue, or we're going to this church service, or wherever we're going, we want to know, what should I expect? Are masks going to be mandatory? Are they going to be optional? Will there be social distancing? Are we not really going to do that? Are we going to be outside or inside? It is reasonable to find that information out, to ask those types of questions, so that when we engage in social interaction, we're not shocked by what we're experiencing. Because that shock can produce some anxiety in the moment, and not knowing can produce anxiety ahead of time. So I want to go to this birthday party, but I'm nervous about going to this birthday party because I don't know what they're going to do. And then maybe I don't go because I'm nervous about how social distancing is going to be handled, or if it's a consideration. And so it is reasonable to ask the host, hey, what can I expect when I come? What's going to be the norm when I come? Some of the churches that have reopened have in them on their websites what you can expect. In my church, they will tell you, we're asking that you wear a mask unless you're seated. We have masks available at the welcome desk. This is how we're handling the bathroom. This is how we're handling offering. They'll tell you ahead of time, and that information can reduce the anxiety. It can help you say, okay, I'm willing to do this, or maybe not. I'm gonna pass on this one. Watch the meeting on YouTube. And so that's one way to reduce anxiety. The other way is if you are actually hosting. If you are setting up a situation, maybe you're taking somebody to the doctor, right? And it's not COVID related, and you say to them, hey, I'm happy to take you to the doctor. I'd love for you to wear a mask while you're in my car. That is a reasonable thing to say to help reduce that anxiety. Or if you're having something at your house, to have right at the door what the expectations are. Keep it up, make it real pretty, have some hand sanitizers and some disposable masks, if that's what you want folks to do. In the same way that we used to tell people to take their shoes off. It is reasonable for us to be proactive relative to decision making and our social activities. All right. So now we're going to move on to the last of our 7 keys: sunlight and other free must-haves. And if you think of some more, please go ahead, put them in the chat, other must-haves. But we'll start with sunlight. Ladies, we need sunlight. We need vitamin D, particularly as ladies, particularly um, um, African American ladies. We need vitamin D. And the lack of vitamin D can actually contribute to depression. That's where it becomes a mental health situation. That's why someone in my position would be concerned about it. We need sunlight. There is limited sunlight during the fall, so we got to take advantage of it. This kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier regarding follow through. I had a client who had this wonderful plan how she's going to get more exercise in, and she's going walking after work, and she's got this all planned out. And I'm like, okay, but you get off from work at 6 o'clock. That's not going to work for the fall. That's kind of a violation of our very first key, that idea of dealing with the reality of things. Her plan, wonderful plan that it was, works great during the summertime, was not going to work during the fall. She was not going to get her sunlight in going walking that late at night. Actually, borderline dangerous at some point in the fall and winter. So we want to make sure that at some point earlier in the day that we are getting some sunlight. Maybe that means eating lunch outside. Maybe that does mean going for a walk. Maybe it means just standing outside and noticing the beauty of creation. And if you've been out early or late over the last month or so, the sunrises and sunsets have been absolutely gorgeous. I mean, those pretty pinks and purples, reds, it's been lovely. The last couple of months, get the sunlight. Another thing that is free and we must have is movement. I mentioned earlier that we're noticing folks having back pain and such. It's a lack of movement that is causing that. We're sitting, right now I'm sitting on a pillow in my favorite chair. Why? Because my favorite chair isn't comfortable anymore. I've been sitting in it too long, too many hours of the day, and that same chair has now made the chair uncomfortable. I'm not moving enough. And that can mean things like just stretching your legs every once in a while you're still in the chair. So I can stretch my legs even while I'm talking to you. I can do ankle circles and I'm not shaking at all. You didn't know it unless I was telling you. But we are created for movement. And it's very easy for us, particularly in a society that doesn't require movement, that we would not move. So if you think about it, an agrarian society, one that's farming based, really would involve movement. You can't just sit somewhere at a computer and get the fields planted. It would require movement, and our bodies are made for this. As I mentioned earlier, intellectual stimulation. This is where those puzzles come in. This is where it's critically important that our minds are focused on something that is a little bit of a challenge. So perhaps reading romance novels or watching silly comedies on TV, that might be fun and relaxing, but at some point, we got to read something that is challenging, something that makes us think. At some point, it's of value to watch one of those old classic movies, Casablanca, something that's got a plot and 4 subplots going along at the same time. Our brains were created for that. And we need to do that. It keeps us sharp, helps to prevent dementia and Alzheimer's and those types of things. But it also gives us great meaning as we go through our days. It helps to keep us interesting to those that are around us. And I'm seeing in the chat that folks are taking advantage of breaks to get outside, to walk, to move. And yeah, every day if it's not raining, is a good day to eat outside. If you gotta get your bug spray, get your bug spray. Or the little bands that are, right before you eat. But those little bands that keep the bugs away, get one of those. Right, I'm hearing in the chat, deep breathing. Deep breathing is so critical. There are lots of different forms of deep breathing, but just the process of breathing in slowly and controlled, holding it and breathing out does so much from a mental health standpoint that they're using stuff like deep breathing to address very serious mental illness, including post-traumatic stress disorder. Some of the gold standard treatment for veterans who have experienced post-traumatic stress disorder is deep breathing. Cheap. Like, if we don't have to pay for that, everybody can do it. It's easy to teach. In fact, I'm going to teach. I do it right now. It is a wonderful, wonderful tool that you can use for all sorts of mental health struggles. So let's do some deep breathing for a moment. I see that several people have mentioned it. So I know folks are doing it. If you've tried deep breathing and it has had no effect, chances are you're not doing it for long enough, or you're not doing it slowly enough. So one of the best ways for us to do deep breathing is to do it in 4, 4, and 4. Breathe in for 4, to hold for 4, and then to release for 4. In through your nose if you can do it, and out through your mouth if you can. But let's just try that one. 4, 4, and 4. Hold. Out. I even did that a little bit fast. It might even go better as in, hold, and out. That is deep breathing. Now, if you want to really make sure that you're doing the real diaphragmatic breathing, you put one hand on your chest. I'm not going to be able to get far enough back. One hand on your chest and one hand on your belly. And when you breathe in, you want to make sure that your belly is getting large, not your chest. So sometimes, particularly when kids do deep breathing, they tend to go, you're not trying to do that. That's not deep breathing. I don't know what it is. It's not deep breathing. You want the chest to stay flat for the belly to get big. And we know that the air is not really going in the belly, but it's getting into that deeper part of the lung. So it's and you can feel the belly going down. You can feel, sometimes you can even feel the belly kind of stretch, like you're doing an exercise for the belly as well. That is the way we do deep breathing. For some folks, particularly if you're trying to do deep breathing before you're going to sleep, it's better to do 4, 6, and 8. So breathing in for 4, holding for 6, and breathing out for 8. Don't do that for more than a couple minutes. You'll start hyperventilating because you're breathing out so much. Okay? But 4, 6, 8 can be very helpful for those who need to go to sleep. I realize I kind of went off on a tangent there, but I love the value of deep breathing. You can do it in the middle of a panic attack or when anxiety is high. It can be refreshing for those who struggle with depression. It's just really, really helpful. We also see adult coloring. That movement of the hand and the hand-eye coordination um, can be very helpful in being relaxed, particularly for folks that are struggling with anger. That precision that is necessary, that focus that is necessary, tends to help people who are dealing with anger. And then I also see you mentioned power naps. Um, Power naps are great. Power naps need to be less than a half an hour, otherwise it's not a power nap. It is a sleep destroying nap. For some folks, it might even need to be a little shorter than 30 minutes. It might only 20 minutes be about right. But power naps can be incredibly refreshing and can actually help with sleep regulation if a person is struggling with sleep at night and just feels like crashing at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. A 10-minute nap at 3 o'clock in the afternoon might help them to be able to keep sleep at sleeping times and not to kind of shut down in the middle of the day. And then I'm wide awake at 10 o'clock at night. And I'm ready to start that tragic cycle all over again. Another free must-have is spiritual growth. It's got to happen. One of the things that I noticed in practice over the last couple of months is that as folks kind of stopped going to church, they stopped their spiritual growth. And there was no need for that. Whether or not the church was offering a lot of services online or not, even if your church wasn't, some church was. There are lots of things available for free, YouTube, etc., that allows us to continue in spiritual growth. It's necessary, and folks that kind of ignore their spiritual side often report some type of emptiness. There's something missing. And so I would contend that whether you share my faith or not, that there is a spiritual element to how you are created. And it's important for that element to continue to grow. And then our final part of this key, Sunlight and Other Free Must-Haves, is the necessity of expression. We are created to express. We are created to communicate. That happens for different people in different kinds of ways. Some folks are talkers. Some folks are writers. Some folks express themselves through drawing or painting, through artwork. But I'm going to contend that we all need to be able to express ourselves and to share in our common experience. We are not created to be loners. There are lots of loners. I'm a loner. I like to be alone, that there's some value in that. I kind of like when my door is shut. It feels good, but we are not designed to never interact. That's not how we were designed. And so it is necessary and important for us to express and share. One of the challenges, though, we mentioned earlier, that what happens when my best friend that I could share everything with, I can't share everything with because she's going through. One of the folks that I typically share with has had 2 deaths in her family and lost a client. I can't put anything else on her. She's got the world on her shoulders already. Who do I go to instead? That may mean getting a counselor or a coach or a mentor, or even just a trained listener. 7 Cups of Tea is an online group that has folks that are trained to listen. You just you chat with them, and they are trained on how to listen carefully to people who are trying to express themselves. And sometimes we do need that outside thing. One of the things I like about one of the places I'm contracted with BetterHelp. You can go on BetterHelp for the most part, depends on what state you're in, and get the help from a counselor anonymously. So I really don't know, who I'm working with, so to speak, unless there's an emergency. I don't know who Jenny 25 is. And Jenny 25 can tell me whatever needs to be expressed, and feel confident that I'm not going to break her confidentiality. And so expression is also a part of it. So I'm curious, I told you at the beginning, to come up with 5 ideas. Put one idea that you came up with that you're going to take with you, one of the keys in the chat. And then I will open it up for questions. And I'll take questions on this or any other mental health subject. I've been working in the field with both children and adults since 1999. If I have an answer, I'll share it, and if I don't, I'll tell you I don't know. I'm opening up to opening up to questions at this